Two sections of the LSAT India are devoted to logical reasoning. And understanding logical reasoning requires you to have a sound understanding of argument and argument structure. We will be dealing with the first part of questions based on assumptions. Now, what is an assumption? An assumption is a very integral part of an argument. Now, an argument is not generally what you think of it as in your daily life. As far as the LSAT India is concerned, an argument consists of a premise or two premises on the basis of which a conclusion is arrived at. Let me give you a simple example. Let's say all men aged over 65 should get tested for arthritis. Next, I give you another premise stating that Ankit is 66 years old. Now, on the basis of this, maybe I might arrive at the conclusion that Ankit should get tested for arthritis. You might at first believe that this was a sound argument, but now let me point out something to you. You may have ignored the fact that there is one essential premise that is required for this to have been a correct, logically sound argument. The third premise that was needed here was the fact that Ankit is male. So as you can see, in arriving at the conclusion that Ankit should get tested for arthritis, we had assumed that Ankit is male. And in this set of questions, we will look at questions relating to the assumptions to understand this concept a little better. Alright, pause the video, try solving this yourself first, and then we'll go for it together. Right, so let us first focus only on the argument without looking at the options. The question statement reads, which of the following is an assumption required by this argument? Which means that you need to identify the assumption that is there in this argument. Before that, let us look at the structure of the argument and try to identify by our own selves as to what the assumption is. Then we'll go look at the options and pick the right option. Okay, what you need to understand is that an argument consists of a certain kind of structure. That structure first requires you to have some premises. Right? The premises are the statements on which the argument is framed, right? The conclusion is drawn, okay? And then on the basis of these premises, a conclusion is arrived at. Now, where the role of the assumption is that the assumption is something that is not stated. That's what we saw a little while earlier. The assumption is like the silent premise. Therefore, when it is silent, it means that you've directly jumped from the premise to the conclusion. It feels like there's a logical step that has been skipped. When you can identify that skipped step, that missed link, that missing link, then you've been able to find your assumption. Okay. Now, when you read this argument, what do you think the conclusion is? Generally, the conclusion is quite easy to identify, right? The conclusion here is that the Jewel of India will not stay open, or that the Jewel of India will be closed. How do you identify that? Words such as so, therefore, thus, hence, because of this reason, henceforth, not henceforth, hence, these things indicate to you that it is a conclusion. Okay. Now let's read the argument together. Jewel of India will be closed if it does not comply with new safety regulations. It's a premise clearly. If it does not comply, it will be closed. I've written that down here. Next line. To comply with these regulations, Jewel of India must purchase a new oven. Okay, let's write that down too. To comply, you need a new oven. Understood. It says, unfortunately, this restaurant will go out of business if it takes more debt. If it takes more debt, it will get closed. Okay. So, Jewel of India will not stay open. Look, it says here that the restaurant will go out of business if it takes more debt. Okay. And if it does not buy a new oven, then also we know that it will be closed. Which means that you can see here that there's something that has happened which has linked this oven to more debt, right? As you can see, the link between these chains, think of it as a chain here and a chain here. You need one link in between to join these. As you can see, the assumption is that purchasing the new oven, right, will result in more debt. So now we know what we're looking for. Purchasing new oven, more debt. Now let us look at the options and see as to which of the options resembles what we've identified as the missing link or the assumption. Whenever you're solving these assumption based questions, remember to keep this procedure in mind. Okay, look for the jumped step. Let's go for the options. When you don't know what you're looking for and you see 5 options before you, it's really troublesome because you can get very easily misguided and misdirected by where these options take you. Now that we know what we're looking for, when you simply even skim through the options, you can very clearly see that A is the answer. It tells you that purchasing a new oven cannot happen unless there is more debt. Okay? Remember this strategy. Always think about what the answer would be. Get an answer in your mind and then go look for that in the options instead of reading the options. Okay? That's how you will save time and increase your accuracy. Right then, next question. Again, assumption based. Pause the video, try solving it yourself. It's a long looking argument if you see in comparison to what we saw earlier. And generally, when there's a long argument, you need to be smart in identifying as to what the key components of the argument are. Okay? Pause the video and try it yourself. Right? Let's read this together. A fishing crew always consulted the local weather service forecast before going to sea. Last week, when the weather service predicted good weather, the crew went out to fish. After they set out to sea, however, a severe storm hit, capsizing their boat. Although the crew members were rescued, their boat was destroyed. When it was later discovered that a buoy used by the weather service to collect wind data had been defective, the fishing crew blamed the weather service for the loss of their boat, arguing, okay. You see, when you have a very long sentence or a very long passage, remember that the argument really cannot be this long. Okay. So, for example, even when you have maybe a typical argument in your daily lives with someone, the point is always very brief, very concise. Okay. You might have a lot of things around that. So, particularly when you see such a long passage in a logical reasoning question, remember that the argument really is not going to involve all of these points. Okay. Let's go ahead and read. It says, arguing that if the weather service had properly maintained its equipment, right? So the defective buoy, which you see here, I don't know what a buoy is, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but that doesn't matter. Okay, you know now that this was some defective equipment. Okay, that there was some defect in the equipment that is used to determine the wind data or whatever. Okay, this is not a test of science, this is not a test of your vocabulary, it's a test of your ability to understand the argument. Okay, so focus on that. It says, arguing that if the weather service had properly maintained its equipment, it would not have forecast good weather, and so the crew would not have gone to sea. Let's look at the argument structure in here. Okay, like I said, there are some premises, there is a conclusion. Okay, and you'd find that in between, the missing link is the assumption. Look at the premises. It says that the crew relies on the forecast. That's very important because there might be some people who don't act upon the forecast. Here we know that this crew always consults and relies upon the forecast. Okay, there was a wrong forecast of good weather, right? So we can see here that it predicted good, but it turned out to be bad. So the second fact that we have, so to speak, is that there was a wrong forecast of good weather. And their argument is that, hey, if the buoy or if this equipment here were not defective, if this buoy were not defective, then there would have been no forecast of good weather and then they would not have gone to the sea. But you can see the conclusion is just being this. Now, these people rely on the report. The report was wrong. And now they are saying, hey, if your equipment had not been defective, you would have said that there is bad weather. If you can see here, this is even their assumption. They're saying that if the buoy had been okay, right, definitely there would have been a forecast of good weather. Okay, I mean there would have been no forecast of good weather. If the buoy were okay, they would have said that the weather is bad. Okay, which means that they're ignoring the possibility that maybe, look, even if that piece of equipment were okay, maybe the machine gets 1 in every 100 predictions wrong, even if it's fully functional. That happens. Maybe the equipment contains 20 components, the boy is one of them. Maybe, the boy was not okay, but something else was also not okay, so maybe it was because of that. So you cannot say that the defective boy resulted in this. You cannot say that, right? Maybe it contributed to it, but you cannot say that if this were okay, then no good weather would have been forecast. There are many reasons that could have contributed to this wrong weather forecast. Okay, and therefore this is the assumption. Now we know what the missing step here is, and let us look at the options and see if we can pick the right answer. Now you look at the options and see as to which of these resembles what we thought. Of course, it's not going to look exactly like what we did, but you're looking for the essence of the assumption that we'd found out. If you look at the options, you can see clearly that the answer is E. It says if the boy had been functioning properly, then the inclusion of the data from it would have changed, right? So we'd said here that if the boy were okay, then it would have been a different weather report, and that's exactly what you get in the option E. I hope you're finding this simple. Let's go ahead. Moving on with the assumption based questions, pause the video, try solving it yourself. Here's just the argument once again and a reminder of how you should go about it. Try to identify the conclusion. That helps you really with understanding the structure of the argument. Then you know what the premises are, and you can just look for the missing premise, that's the skipped step, and you found your assumption. Right, let's read this together. It says historian. I'm bad with history, but let's go ahead. It says in 1948, after the Soviet Union isolated Berlin, the United States sent to a British airfield B-29 bombers that were modified to carry nuclear weapons. Oh God, I really am bad with my geography, and I don't know as to where these countries or cities, whatever they are, I don't know where these are. I don't even know what a B-29 bomber looks like. I mean, to me that could even look like a tree. But here's the good news, okay? Solving the LSAT India questions seldom requires you to have any external knowledge of disciplines such as social science, law, maths, GK, or physical sciences. You need none of that. What you need primarily is your ability to comprehend what is given to you, to be able to identify structure. Okay, and I've been talking about this all this while. You do not need to get bogged down or frightened by seeing these details that really are not going to help you. It's not going to help you to know them. Okay, knowledge is not really what helps you in the LSAT India. It's your ability and your skill, your dexterity in being able to solve the questions. So when you approach a question and you see data that you're not so familiar with, don't be frightened. Look at it with a lot more confidence. So let us approach this once again with some more confidence. Now, we generally draw diagrams for questions of analytical reasoning, but in case you find sometime that you're unable to comprehend the text of even the logical reasoning section or even in the RC, I found that diagrams really help me. Okay, so let's say this is Berlin, this is the Soviet. I don't know where they are, what they look like, so I just do a random amoeboid shape. And I know from here that, the US tactic was to prevent an attack by the Soviet on Berlin. Okay, so this is what he wanted to avoid. Okay, and the US tactic was to bring some B-29 bombers to the British airfield, which I've just called BA. Okay, so you've put some bombers on the British airfield, and these were to be within striking distance of Moscow, which means it's kind of close to Moscow. So, if there were a B-29 bomber here, it could kind of land here, right? So this was the tactic. Now, let's look at this once again. You see, by drawing a little diagram in your head, you don't really need to draw this in the exam, but I think it enhances your clarity. Let's do this again. So basically what we are saying here is that there's a British airfield, there's Moscow close by within striking distance, and then there's Berlin somewhere, and there's Soviet somewhere. Okay. Now, to deter an attack on Berlin, by the Soviet. B-29 bombers were brought to a British airfield by the US. Okay. Now let us put all of this into the structure of our argument. Okay. So you have the premises, the conclusion, and then you're looking for the assumption in there. It says that the intention was to deter an attack on Berlin, right? We can see here that it was intended to prevent or deter an attack on Berlin. Okay. The second thing is that bombers were brought to the British airfield, which was close to Moscow. Okay. This was the tactic. Okay. And we see in the conclusion that, hey, the tactic apparently worked. Now, again, when you see something like an opinion, something in the form of an opinion, that is also very likely to be the conclusion. Okay. So the tactic worked and no attack on Berlin. So Soviet was deterred. The plan was successful. Now, what is the assumption in here? Okay. The assumption is basically going to answer the question that, hey, how do you connect bringing bombers close to Moscow? Bringing bombers close to Moscow. How does that prevent the Soviet from attacking Berlin? Okay. When you do that, it says it's very simple. If the Soviet attacked, there would be an attack by the bombers. I don't know where Soviet is. Okay, you don't need to know all of these things. It's very basic, very fundamental. I hope you can see right now that your knowledge of the map, the world map, is not really going to matter so much. Okay, you're not supposed to think, oh, where's Berlin, where's Moscow, there's more to the Soviets than just Moscow. Don't bother about those things. Put it into this table. So we now see that the assumption here is that, hey, if the Soviet attacked Berlin, then there could be, or there would be, an attack by the B-29 bombers. Let us see if we have an option that resembles this. Alright, so with the intention of deterring an attack by the Soviet, okay, you brought in some B-29 and we saw that indeed they were deterred by the presence of the B-29. The question is, why was that? Why did that happen? That's why you're looking for the assumption. Well, because, if the Soviet were to attack, then the B-29 would be used. When you have this clarity and you look at the options, you can see that the answer really stands out. The answer is option E. Spend some time, look at the other options and see as to why they're wrong. Okay, let's go ahead. Right, next question. Pause the video, try solving the question yourself. It's again a question which asks you to identify the assumption. Right, let's read this together. It reads that this university ought to evaluate the success of each of its foreign language departments in a given year on the basis of the number of students majoring in each. Okay, so it says evaluate the success based on the number of people who major. It says this is because each of the departments has an equal opportunity to demonstrate its success through attracting majors. The number of majors in each department is the most accurate indicator of the quality of the teaching offered there. The greater the number, the better the teaching. This looks kind of odd to me, that the more the number of majors, the better the teaching. I mean, is this really true? I mean, it's possible that there can be teaching which is better at a place where the people are less. It's very very confusing. Okay, a more important question is, do you even require to be thinking on these lines? I know this might sound a little funny to some of you, but this might happen to you in some other question. Remember that when anything is given to you in an LSAT India problem, you are to simply focus on the structure of the argument, treating the facts, the principles given in the question as true. So you are to believe this as the truth. You are to believe this as being accurate. You have to act upon this as if it were true, precise and accurate. Do not evaluate this kind of information. Right? So although you may not have done this in this particular case, I just want you to be alert and I want you to be aware of the fact that this is a very common occurrence, especially when you're solving many questions in the exam. Right? For the sake of comfort, clarity, I've just marked these as 1, 2, 3, and 4. We've seen the first three already. Let's look at the first one. It says the university ought to evaluate the success of a department on the basis of the number of students majoring in it. Okay. The second line tells you that, you know what, all of these departments have an equal opportunity to attract students. Okay. That means there's a level playing field. That's what it's kind of telling you. Then it says that the number of majors in each department is the most accurate indicator. If there's a greater number, it means there was better teaching. The final line says, therefore, a language department that attracts twice as many majors is to be considered twice as successful. Now I want you to pay attention to 1 and 4. Okay, you may want to pause the video after this and see if there's any difference between what is being addressed in 1 and what is being addressed in 4. You'd see that they look quite similar, but is there a difference? Let me point out the difference to you. If you look at 1, what you can see is that it talks about the number of students majoring. Okay, whereas 4 talks about the number of students attracted. Okay, you can see that a conclusion here has been drawn on a couple of premises given here, but you can see that sometimes you see attracting and sometimes you see majoring. Okay, we saw in the second statement that it talks about an equal opportunity, which means you're giving it a level playing field. Now you need to understand, is the opportunity to attract, right? There's an equal opportunity to attract, but is the equal opportunity to attract the same as an equal opportunity for students to major? What you see here is that they have equated the opportunity to attract as being the opportunity to major. This is an assumption, right? So we're required to find the assumption in this argument. Okay. Now an argument proceeds in a certain logical sequence. Okay. So let us say this is your logical sequence. So you have something on the basis of which a conclusion is arrived at. This is your logical progression. Now an assumption basically is that you maybe were here and then you jumped from this to this, or maybe you jumped from here until here. Now the jump that you have made basically is your assumption. Okay, so when you missed something, that qualifies as your assumption. So now what we can see here is that it has treated a student who was attracted on the same footing as someone who has majored. It has kind of put these two on the same footing. So we need to see which one of these options does that. Okay, let's maybe start with option D. Let's look at D. It says the same number and variety of courses offered in each language are offered in each language from year to year. Doesn't help. E. Different students taking a different foreign language never evaluate the quality of the teaching in that course very differently. Doesn't help. Let's look at A, which is the right answer. It says no foreign language department is forced to turn away potential majors, which means that, let's say you attracted a student. Okay, now your classroom is such that you have enough seats for all the persons who have shown interest. Okay, which means if there's a student who's attracted, that person will also major. This you can see in option A. Okay, like I said, when you think about what the assumption is, it will be phrased in a manner that's a little different in the options, but it will convey the same meaning to you. Okay, practice these questions and you'll get better at it. Let's proceed.